Alright, so today we're going to be doing the front suspension. That's going to include ball joints, all of the front end bushings except for the sway bar, only because there's plenty of videos out there on how to do the sway bar bushings. It's just one of those things where, I watched them, felt they were fine, so like there's no point in me making another one and taking away from them. They already put in the hard work, so. But yeah, so it's going to be the upper and lower control arm bushings, upper and lower ball joints. I am actually going to do the hubs too, only because I can. It's a little different on an 84. And we're also going to do the rack. So I'm going to do the same thing, just show you the one side, only because, it's the same, just mirrored. And that's that. And I'm going to start with dropping the sway bar, only because the other side's partially apart and I need to take the sway bar out anyway, so may as well. Alright, so the sway bar upper is pretty easy, just a 15mm. Lower is the same thing. That didn't work. I'm gonna need an adapter.
And that's it. Now I'm gonna do is bolt out. And that's it. Next up we're gonna get the bracket off
So the only reason I'm pulling the bracket out so I can pull the sway bar out is because I think it's gonna make getting the rack out easier. So I have my 15mm. So to get the sway bar out, all I did was I pulled these two 13mm bolts off of this bracket on both sides and slid it out of the way. And now all I'm doing is just pulling the bracket out the rest of the way. And that's that. Alright, so we got the sway bar out of the way. So the next thing we gotta do is we gotta get ourselves our access to all of our bolts to be able to take this apart. So basically all we got to do is we got to pull this access panel out. So we just got to pull these bolts here, and if you look, there's one there, there's a couple down here. And a few over there. So those just got to come out so that we can pull this access panel out. I'm going to bust them free without recording because they're kind of awkward to get to while holding the camera. And I'll slide the plate out and I'll show you where all the holes are on the plate. So just to show you, the panel is free, so I took out all the ones on the front here, you can see. So those guys. And I also took out the inner ones, which you'll see when I pull it apart. There are, at least on my 84, I don't know how it'll be on your car if you're not doing it on an 84, but there are a couple of clips like that one down there that are holding wire loom in place that need to be popped out as well. I'm just going to use one of those door trim tools where it's the fork type thing. Even a screwdriver will work fine just to pop those out. So just to quick show you, this is the orientation of that panel inside of the car. So these are all the external ones that I showed you that line up with those holes. But inside here, you can see there's two that go straight down in the back and three that go straight down in the front. Those screws are actually a different type of screw as well. They're tapered cone because they use the retained nut in frame type deal, so it makes it a little harder to cross thread, even though I've seen people do it very easily. So with that, we're going to continue pulling apart now. And so same thing as before, we're going to start with the tie rod end for the steering knuckle. And I'm going to find the correct size nut for that, which should be 18mm, but you never know. Yeah, 18mm, beautiful. and we're just gonna break her free. Now, you can use a pickle fork, however, I would advise against it, only because of the fact that this is all aluminum, so jamming a pickle fork in here is going to really mar, cut up, scrape, you know, whatever you want to do to it, it's basically going to do to it and damage it. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to actually use a 2-jaw puller. They also make a, you know, any type of puller. And I'm also going to give this a couple blows real quick. To like I said, just give it a couple blows just to help it loosen up a little bit. And then I'm going to grab my puller. And it pops free just like that. So now we can take our nut out. And like that, our knuckle is out. Now, if you were, you know, just going to be reusing this, I wouldn't beat on the castle nut as hard as I did, only because it can, you know, as you can see, it's egged a little bit, but I'm going to be replacing the rack and the tie rod, so for me, it's not that big of a deal. Next, we're going to start pulling apart the rest of the assembly to get to the other bolts. Alright, so next I'm going to get off the caliper bracket. I'm just going to pull the whole bracket assembly off, which is these two 18mm nuts on the back here. And they're torqued fairly high, so yeah, just get some leverage on it. And that one's free. And that one's free. And I'm obviously, you know, I'm gonna stop. Alright, so I just broke those bolts the rest of the way free. We're gonna pop this up and out of the way. And I'm just gonna tie it up here. Place it out of the way. So next up, I'm do the same thing for the cotter pin on the lower. Alright, so I just got a 13/16 on there because I don't have this size in metric, and my 1/2 inch, and that's it. pop really easy actually. But that's it. So the lower's out. And we'll do the topper too, because we're here. The upper should be 18 millimeter. Yep. And that's it. I cannot believe this is coming apart this easy. The other side fought me the entire way apart, so. Put this guy on here. Just lift this guy off. And that's it. Now your spindle assembly is out of the way. And I'm just going to put the other castle nut and washer on here, just so that things don't get mixed up. And that's that for this part. Alright, so all I've done is I've just grabbed the jack and raised it up on here until it touched it, and then just raised it ever so slightly to take the pressure off of all these bolts. So there are 3 holding the plate to the lower control arm. So it's this one, and this guy back here. And then these 2 hold the shock to the plate. So they're all 13 millimeter. I'm going to use my electric ratchet for this and just hold the nuts on the bottom with a wrench. And let me just go set that up. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread the 2 shock bolts back in a couple turns so they don't get lost, and move this out of the way. So now that we have that off, we can relieve the pressure off of our jack. Which will take all the pressure off of the spring. So now you can see the springs down all the way, and we have access to the lower and upper brackets. So next up on the list, we're going to attack these 2, which are 18 millimeter, and those will be pretty tight, and you're going to want to use a deep socket. Like so. And I'm gonna go get a cheater bar for this. So just got a cheater pipe on a ratchet, and there's no need to worry about holding the backs of these bolts. They're actually retained in the frame. They're keyed sort of like a cap head bolt. And that's broken free. And we're gonna do the same thing on the front. Okay. Now, one other thing to take note of on these bolts here is your washer stack for your alignment. So what you want to do when you pull these apart is mark. I have a Ziploc baggie, and you just want to put all the parts for the front and the back one in that bag, so that when you put it back together, hopefully it's kind of close. We'll see. But like I said, I'm gonna have this aligned after I do all this work. So I'm just gonna back these out the rest of the way, and then the control arm will just flip up and out. So once you get both of the bolts and nuts backed off a little bit, you'll be able to reach in and kind of just slide the shim out. So you can see all I'm doing is just grabbing the shim. And I mean, you know, my car only has the one shim on this with a, you know, a thick and a thin. So, I mean, your car very well may be different, but I'm just doing that for the back. And I have my bag. And now I'm going to slide the bolt out as far as I can get it. And then I'm going to back the nut off on the front and do the same thing with those shims. Alright, so I've pulled the shims out, and I have the nut off completely. And now all I'm going to do is push the bolt out real quick. It's hitting on the power steering hoses, ironically enough. So I'm just pushing the power steering lines down ever so slightly to be able to get the clearance to pull this bolt out. And I need 2 hands for this, but take my word on it, that's all I'm doing. Also note, there's a thin and a thick washer. The thick one goes in the back on both sides. So put those in. So ironically, my exhaust headers prevent the back bolt from coming out, and my power steering pump pulley prevents the front bolt from coming out. That being said, I still have gained enough room to sort of pull the control arm forward off of the bolts. Now all I have to do is just sort of move the wire loom out of the way and move the control arm up over the shock tower. And it's out. So all I did was I just kind of lifted the wire harness up and out of the way, and then rolled it over, and I am going to leave the 2 bolts that actually hold the bracket in place since, well, I can't really do anything about that. We're going to get on the bottom bolts now, and the way this is set up is it's a 15mm on the outside and an 18mm nut on the inside. And I'm going to use my impact with a swivel extension and cheat only because I'm lazy, and these bolts should be pretty tight. They should be torqued to 100 foot-pounds at least. So with that, let's get that. So for the record, I know this is cheating using the impact on these, but I'm just trying to make my job smarter, not harder, and I'm going to use it. So we have the nut from the inside. There's also a washer on the inside. I can get it. See, washer, nut. And then we just have to get this. Now this is going to be wedged ever so slightly because it doesn't quite fit, so I'm going to work this out real quick and come back to you and then pull the bolt out. Alright, so I just popped off the socket and extension, and it's basically just a sort of work it out I have found that this tends to get a little stuck in there because of the lower bushing. And of course, there we go. So we're just working the bolt out carefully. And it's getting stuck, so I'm just going to take a wrench, slide it through, and use it to kind of wedge the head of the bolt. And there's no sense in you watching me struggle with this, so I'm going to pause and then get the So the front is same. We've got the 18mm in there and the 15mm up here. Nut goes on the inside. And now we have our control arm out. So you can see you got your spring pad here, and then that's it. I'm just gonna do. Alright, so the hub is just 15mm through bolt, so there's a nut on the back, and then it uses a 15mm on the other side, the head of the bolt. So all I'm gonna do is just hold the head. And zip these guys off. Now, if you look at this side of the hub, it's actually holed so that you can pull the bolt through. Our hub will just hopefully separate from the knuckle, which it's not. Alright, so I just gave it a couple more good whacks with the hammer and it finally popped out. The dust shield's held on with 3 10mm, and I'm just going to pop that off, and then everything's going to go in the parts washer and get cleaned. And that's as far as I'm going on this stuff, and we're going to focus on the rack next. So for the rack portion, if you're not doing it, just skip it. And that would be that. Alright, so first step is I'm going to start pulling off the rack. And as far as what I'm going to do first, I'm going to get the lines broken free. Looks like they're both 18mm, and I just quick slid this pipe over the end of that open end to give me the leverage I needed to break it free. And it's kind of awkward. I would assume a crow's foot would be better for this. I have my catch can underneath the car to catch any fluid should it leak out. And all I'm going to do is hopefully just work that out. Now I need both hands for this because it's kind of awkward, so just take my word for it. So now that the first line is out of the way, it gives me access to grab the second line from inside the wheel well and just break it free. And once again, it's just a simple spin the line off. It's also an 18mm, as I had said, so I'm just going to work that through. I have my fluid running into my catch can right now. It's not a ton's actually coming out, which is kind of surprising. So, yeah, I'm just going to spin that off. Alright, so now that both lines are out of the way, it's starting to leak more. I cracked the cap open on my pump. But, so yeah, we've got both hoses out of the way, disconnected from the rack. So, next up's getting underneath the car and starting to pull. Looks like there's a through bolt there, and then the bracket on the other side, and that really seems to be it. So, we're gonna give it a shot. One more thing I want to mention, I just did this actually before I went any further, but I ran the steering wheel lock to lock real quick and just counted how many turns it was, and then just divided that in two and locked out the steering column with the factory, key off lock about center, so that the column and the clock spring and everything can't get messed up. So the tie rods are about where they would be at center, so that when the new rack goes in, the steering shaft and everything just lines up. So next up, I guess I'm gonna pull the bolt off the lower rag joint, which is that guy down there, and it should just be a nut and bolt, or it might even be just a through bolt. I forget. It's been a while. So I actually ended up clicking it one over to the left for now and locking it, so that it makes getting this bolt out easier. It's an 11mm, and I'm just going to bust it out and then lock it out at center again. So it is just a through bolt, so, and it's tighter than what my impact can do, so I'm going to have to get a bigger one. Alright, now that it's broken free, it's just a retained bolt with a little thread locker on it, and that's it. So now the rack will actually be able to slide off of the end of the rag joint. I'm just going to put this up here for safekeeping, and I'm going to go lock the steering column back out at center. So all I am doing for that is like so. One click over, and just finding where it locks, and that's it. Alright, next up we're going to just a heads up, the through bolt on the one side is a 15mm, so I just have my 15mm open end on it, and I'm going to go underneath. So this is the other side of it, and you can see the wrench is just up there. I need both hands to really do this, but it's a 15mm on this side as well, and I'm just going to it out and pull the bolt through. So with that, I'm going to stop recording. So bolt pulled out. It wasn't super tight, which is nice. Last step, I would assume, is this guy right here. There's one that you can get from underneath, like this, and the other one's on the top. I gotta see what size that is, but I'm going to guess. It looks like it uses a nut. That kind of sucks. I thought it was a retained in place, but no matter. I'll have to figure out what size it is. As you can see, I just have the 13mm on the nut underneath, and then I have several extensions coming up to the top here, and hopefully that's enough to get it out. But you do have a pretty straight shot at both of them from up top, at least on this car. So I'm going to give that a whirl. And for the record, getting to that back one is quite tricky. If you have a long reach 13mm, which I don't, it would make it much easier. So I'm kind of just getting it with the tip of the wrench and jamming my hand in there and then praying as I pull it apart. Not the end of the world, but not the best situation either. Just a small
Fingers
update. I pulled the bracket off of the condenser. It's just this guy with a 10mm screw going through it to there, so that I could have a clearer shot at that bolt. And now I'm just going to go underneath with my open end, hold it, and zip it out. Alright, so I got both those out. Now I'm just going to lift up the bracket out of the way. Like that. Put up the bolts. And now we're going to get underneath and attempt to work the rack out. So I'm going to get a pry bar to go under here to sort of it up, and then I'm hoping to just pull it forward off of the steering column, and then we can slide it out. So,
So as you can tell, this has been leaking for quite a while. I had done the old, put the stop leak in it, and it worked for a while. But it's got to the point where the car was leaving a drip mark pretty much every time I parked it. So, yeah, it was due. I can't seem to pry it with one hand, so just take my word on it that all I'm going to do is I'm just going to push it up and then pull forward.
Alright, so I have it lifted up and out of the way mostly. I'm going to go up top and pull the spline on the column the rest of the way off, and then hopefully be able to drop it out. So you can see all I'm doing is just trying to get the nub off the rack the rest of the way. I just got a long flat blade screwdriver that I'm using to accomplish this. And now I'm just pulling on the back end, and I need both hands for this. But you get the picture. So I'm just going to get the last little bit of the nub off, and that should be that. Alright, so it popped off, and next thing I guess is pull the rack. Just by looking at it, I think it'll kind of just pull out. I have to go back underneath. I'm gonna have to use both hands for this, so I apologize again. So it looks like to pull the rack out the rest of the way, I'm gonna need to pull the fan trap, because it seems the only way I can get it to swing properly and easily, it hits the fan shroud. So I'm just gonna pull. It's these 4 bolts, 1, 2, and then same spot on the bottom, 13mm, and I'll come right back. It's pretty straightforward. Now that I pulled the fan shroud out, I did get it to come all the way forward, which is good. I kind of just did a rock roll, and got it to kind of come around everything. So that's good. Basically now I have it to the point where I think I can slide it out. So let's get upside and see. So at this point, all it's done is actually hooked itself on the power steering line, which I can simply push out of the way. And it seems to be a little bit stuck. think it's just getting hooked on something on the other side, if I'm being honest. Let's just give it a good little check here. I might have to go from the other side. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to push. And there we go. And we now have our rack removed from the vehicle. Alright, so now I have the factory rack and the replacement rack side by side, and all I'm doing is I'm just lining them up to make sure that nothing seems too different about them. And I'm going to thread on my tie rod ends, center the rack, and just do a end-to-end real quick alignment. Line up the old tie rod ends to the new tie rod ends so that it's, you know, ballpark about the same spot. And then we'll get going on putting it back in. And that's that. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is, before I do anything, I'm going to, you know, spitball everything together. And first thing I'm going to do is take this rack, the old one, and just go all the way out to lock. So I just have a 9/16 on the flat spot of the thing, and we can see. So we're just going to count. So that's a half, 1, 1.5, 2, and a quarter. So we're going to do 1 and about there. Should be about center. So half, 1, and about there. And it doesn't look center because the boots are weird, but take my word for it. So same thing, half, 1, and a little bit. And that should be about right for center. And then we're just going to do the same thing on the new guy to make sure he's centered. And we'll go and count locks. So go to one side. So that's half, 1, 1.5, 2, and a little bit more. So half, 1, and about there. We'll call center. And in theory, these guys should be about lined up. And good to go. Which, judging by where the bolt hole is and the way it goes in, we should be good. Next up, we're going to get our tie rod ends.
Alright, so all I did was I threaded in the Zerk fitting with the 3/8 wrench. I am using AC Delco tie rod ends.
So you want to take your jam nut, put that on first. And these are not directional as far as what way it rests on the tie rod end. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread it all the way down. And I'm going to do this on both sides. And then I'm going to put both tie rod ends on at the same time and run them in the same amount of turns on each side. So that as long as I get it like really close, it's close enough, and then it can be aligned. So I'm gonna do that. All right, so I ballparked my turns, and I have them with what I feel is pretty dang close. So now all you gotta do is you gotta get a wrench on here and then a wrench on your jam nut and just crank down on your jam nut to lock the tie rods in place. Also noted this new rack actually comes with O-rings on here, I guess, to replace. I'm not going to use them because I have new hoses, so I'm just going to snip those off. But let me go get those. Alright, so I just got those jam nuts cranked down. I'm going to cut those. Actually, I'm going to leave the zip ties for now. I'll cut them after it's in the car. And next we're going to go get at the lines inside the car real quick. So for the low pressure side, it's just the hose that runs up to the bottom of the reservoir here. Again, not sure if this is the same on later cars, but it's just a hose clamp on a barb. And I'm going to pop that hose clamp off and pull the hose off the barb. So I have the return side out. I'm going to work on the pressure side now. Taking a quick peek. It's kind of hard to find, but it would appear that the line goes in there, which is kind of down behind the power steering pump pulley. But if I just kind of go in there with the alternator off, I don't think it'll be too bad. So I'm gonna have to pull the alternator, which on my car is just this bolt, that bolt, and this rear bolt, as well as that. They're all 14 or 15 millimeter, and then it's a 10 millimeter on the back case. So with the alternator out, yeah, I have pretty decent access to that. It's a 5/8. That's what I have that fits it anyway. So all I'm going to do is just go in like so. And I'm going to have to get a cheater bar on that to break it free. But alright, so I've changed again. I'm actually going to pull the bracket off the front of the car, which involves basically pulling these two bolts off here because they mount into the head boss, and then this one on the power steering pump, the water pump, to allow the bracket to kind of swing out of the way. So I'm going to do that and then get to it, because even though I can reach it, there's no good angle to grab it. This also includes this bolt here, kind of hidden by this wire loom, but gotta pull that one off as well. So my car's a little bit different than other cars. I also have this standoff bracket on there, so there's a bolt that goes into the top of the water pump, and then it runs through the intake and it's sandwiched on the water pump bolt, so that has to come out as well. And then there's just one more bolt down there. You can kind of make it out all the way in the back there. That goes in from behind the pulley. So once that's out, you'll be able to move the pump out of the way and get to the hose. Okay, so you can see I've just pulled the power steering pump up and out of the way. And now I'm going to just finish pulling this guy out. And I'll put the new hose in. And that'll be it. So all I did was quick lube up the O-ring on the new part and thread it on. Now all I'm going to do is pop that guy in there. Get it started. And I'm not going to go 100% tight. I'm just going to snug it, because now that it's broken free, I can get the final little with it in place, because this might have to be moved ever so slightly for clearance issues. So I'm just going to get it really close, and that's that. just snugged, and it moves ever so slightly. And then once it's in, I will tighten it the rest of the way. Alright, so now that we got this all together, with our hose lightly pushed in, I'm actually just going to pull this tag off. So now we're going to roll the pump back down to where it's supposed to be. And we'll get it on here. Does not go on there like that. And we'll just get it started. Do the same thing on this guy. And the same thing, just get it started. And then the one underneath, down here on the bottom, we'll do the same thing. I'm not going to show that one only because it's kind of a pain in the neck to get to. And then the last one, which goes through there, like so. And all three of them fell out, so not started enough. But you get the picture. Alright, so the brackets are back in and installed. Got all my nuts on and tight. Next up, I'm just gonna swing power steering line until it's not touching the header, and then I'm going to tighten the fitting there the rest of the way with my 5/8. Alright, and just for the record, they give you a little cap to stick on the end so you don't get the grit in. So I have the hose tightened up and where I want it. Next I'm going to do the return line, the low pressure side, which should just be cut to fit regular rubber hose. I have the end fitting for that as well because I'm replacing that because I don't want any leaks. And I also have a filter that I'm going to install on it as well. I have the adapter and the hose. I'm not going to install it yet only because I want to get the rack in and make sure I have the clearance because the metal on this nipple is a little bit longer. And if I don't have the clearance, I'm going to have to reuse the stock one, which I'm trying not to do. So next up, I'm going to actually leave the alternator out because it does give me a little bit more room to work. But we're going to start going back and forth on if I should install this bushing in the car or out of the car. And I figure it's probably better if I do it inside the car, only because then it doesn't get knocked around and knocked out. So I'm going to slide the rack in now. All right. Let us begin. All I am doing is just kind of getting it to slide in where I want it to go. I don't want to give it any love taps or anything, but this should go with just wiggling with two hands like this. So I'm just going to put the camera down for a second. And that's exactly what happened. So that's good. Now we're just going to rotate this around like so. And start to work it into its actual
home under there. And we're also gonna pop in the end of the knuckle onto the end of the shaft down there. Again, something I need 2 hands for, and then I'm just gonna kind of work it into the perch there. So I'm gonna pause the video again for a second and just do that. So it was kind of tricky to get that back on, but I kind of just wiggled the rack around by hand until I got it started and kind of just wiggled the thing. I actually ended up unlocking the column and grabbing the end of the rag joint and kind of working it on by hand, and then it slid on. So we're good now. Next up, we're going to go underneath the car and get the bolts back in. All I'm going to do here is just pull down on the rack a little bit to work it into its perch the rest of the way. And it should just kind of work its way to its resting spot. I'm not gonna, again, record this because I feel it's an over explanation, and more importantly, I want to get this bushing on first. So I'm just gonna put the bushing. You can do that better if you try to actually freaking hooked my belt with the rack. Good thing I caught that. I'll have to pull that out too. This is why you actually take your belt all the way out. Alright, so all I did was I greased up my poly bushing, and I actually cut it in half so that I could just pop it on instead of having to pull a boot off. I don't really particularly think it matters, and the factory one was already split. So I'm going to just lift that up, spread this open, and plop it in, and then put the cap on. So I'll show the cap and the bolts and everything, but I'm not going to show the bushing because I kind of need 2 hands for that. So all I did was I just kind of pulled down by hand on the rack to get the bushing to line up, and I'm going to just push the bolt in to get it started. And I might have to work it a little bit more down, push and, push and work it. But, that's that. It's in. And same thing for the back. I'll probably have to wiggle it around a little bit to get it to come in on the back, but you get the picture. So to get the steering arm to drop that last little bit to get the bolt through, I ended up coming up here and I saw that the knuckle wasn't quite on all the way, so I just took a long screwdriver in the hammer, hammer, and just kind of tapped the end of the knuckle a couple times so it slid on the rest of the way, and then the rack just dropped right into place. So now we're going to go to the other side and put that bracket on. So for this bracket, I actually ran out and picked up the extended reach wrenches that I was talking about. So you can see that's a regular 13 up there, and this is an extended reach one. It's just going to make it easier to get at those bolts. Yeah, you could do it without it, but I took it out without it, and I basically said to myself, no, I need that to put it back in, because it's just something that I physically do not want to deal with. And with that, let us begin. So first things first, we're going to get the bracket in. So I'm just going to plop that like so. And get it around the bushing. And then we have our bolts. I'm going to drop the back one in first because it's the harder one to get to. I'm going to drop it in from the top here. And the bracket moved, of course. Alright, I'm gonna need both hands for this. I apologize. But
So
you get
the reason
gist.
why this is such a nice thing is I can just pop that nut in there like so. And reach back to that bolt fairly easily instead of really straining to get at it. And then all I gotta do is start tightening it from the top, which I'm gonna do. Right, but so as you can see, I don't have it all the way tightened. I just have it started so that I can go on the back one here, put this on, and then compress it and tighten that one as well so that I can get a bolt started. Because if I made that one all the way tight, I wouldn't be able to move this one down. So again, need two hands, but you get the gist. Alright, so I have the bracket in. I'm going to go over to the other side and put the bolt in. The torque spec on this, I'm not 100% sure. I want to say it's 22 foot-pounds. Because I have so many extensions running to it, I can't really get at it good with the torque wrench and get an accurate reading. So with that, just get it close and it is what it is. It's not a super critical part, it's more just holding this from moving back and forth. So as long as it's tight, you're good. Don't snap the bolt off, but just get it pretty tight. The same thing with these two bolts. This bolt, I mean. It's nothing super critically tight. It's 25 foot-pounds, and I misspoke on those. Those are only 18. So nothing critically overbearingly tight. Just, you know, a little bit more than snug. With that, I'm not going to show you tightening this because it's just put the wrench in from the top and tighten it from down here again. So I'm just going to do it with the camera off because it's easier to get at. So a quick check reveals I am good to go with my replacement adapter for the return side, so that's good. So next we're going to get our bolt in to hold the steering column to the end of the shaft here. And that's just an 11mm, and you just want to make it tight, not super snug, you know. And I'm going to put some thread locker on it as well. Alright, the bolt is tight to the shaft. We now have no free play in the shaft, which is good. Everything's locked. So next up, we're going to get our hoses back in. So all I did was I put the clamp on for the power steering reservoir, and I pulled the cap off of the return, lubed the O-ring up with some WD, and I'm just getting it started by hand so that it's good to go. You may notice I have my hose cut. Like I said, I got one of those magnetic inline filters that I'm going to put on as a precaution just to catch any crap that could accumulate from a brand new rack or anything else in the system. And after a little bit, I'll just pull it out and put the hose back on, and that'll be that. So once again, for the high pressure line, just poking it in, and I'm going to start threading it up, and that'll be that. I also lubed up the end again with a little bit of WD just so that it helps the O-ring. Alright, so with all that in, next step, I'm just going to put back the alternator and re-put the fan in and attach the bracket back to the AC condenser. As far as like ease, it's pretty straightforward, but other than that, the rack is done except for attaching the ball joint, the tie rod ends to the knuckles, and that'll be done later when I actually reinstall the spindles to the car. So that'll be in the other part of the video. So with that, the rack installation is finished. Well, okay, I misspoke there. It's obviously not finished, as you do have to add power steering fluid to it and bleed it, and all you do with that is you fill the reservoir up, you turn the rack back and forth a couple times, it comes down, and you level it out, start the car, let it run, level it, and just keep checking the fluid level. Nothing super intricate about that. There's thousands of videos on how to bleed a power steering system. So for the scope of this, I'm finished. Alright, so I'm just starting with the lower ball joint. They're just a press fit, so all I have is have the V-block set up supporting the lower control arm on the flat, and I'm just going to press out the ball joint straight through. There's no circ clip or anything that retains it, it's the friction fit. So yeah, see, it's pressed through, and all I'm going to do is force it the rest of the way out. And that's that. Next up, we're going to do the inner bushings. Alright, so for pressing out the bushings, there's a smaller end on the inside and the fatter end on the outside. And due to the space constraints of my press, I actually have to press it this way up and out. So, same thing, just a socket on it. Tighten it up and just work it down. Obviously, not really worth it to show you the whole thing, but you get the idea. Alright, so we're going to get started, and the first thing we're going to do is replace the lower ball joint, and all that is, it's just drop it, and then press it into place. So I'm going to set the press up, and then
so I just got it set up like so, and I'm just going to
push it in.
So I hammered it home. See, we're touching all the way around. So that's good. We're going to relieve the pressure, and that's
Next
done.
up is the Zerk fitting, and that's just pretty straightforward. Thread it till it's touching, and take a 3/8 and just tighten it. And you want it to face this way so that you can actually access it without having to pull the wheel off. And this is very hard to do with one hand, but you get the gist. I'm going to spin this around the rest of the way until it faces. Alright, so with the Zerk fitting done, we got to go to the other side. And the last thing to do is to put the dust boot on, grease boot, whatever you want to call it. And basically, that's a really straightforward thing. So if you see, it has this install inboard portion on it. So I'm just going to loop that like that. Take my stack of sockets like so, and then just tap it a couple of times lightly to seat that rubber bushing. And that'll see it's pushed down all the way, covers up the grommet. So that's a perfect seal. And then any excess grease will just leak out on that little dimple. That's why you want to put it inboard so it doesn't end up on the brake rotor or anything like that. Alright, so for the lower control arm, it's the same bushing front and back. It is part number 0458 IS, and the only thing is these are orientated. The smaller side gets pushed in from the outside and faces inward. So with that, we're going to press. So this is the proper orientation as per Superpro. I'm just going to start pressing on the lower control arm bushing, and it should just go right in. Nothing much crazy to it, you know. So same thing for the other side. Same bushing, same everything, same process. So the inner crush tube is the same thing too. Just line it up, press it in. They go in really easy. It's just a little tricky to get them started. And I mean, once they're started, you can push them in by hand if you want. So that's that. And so with that, the front bushing setup and ball joint is installed, so this is ready to go back in the car, and now we're going to switch our focus to the upper instead of the lower. And for the upper, what you have to do is you have to grind down these rivets, and then so the way I had done it is I ground them down from the top. That way, if you do damage the housing, you're only damaging the part that you're replacing, not the actual aluminum piece. And then I drilled and pressed them out, and then you have to come in here and disassemble this. Now, just for reference, I actually marked an F on here and an F on here with my scribe, just so that I know the correct orientation for this to go back in. I mean, once the ball joint's in, you can kind of figure it out. But this washer here is located specifically too, because there's a certain way this has to be pressed apart. So this washer has to be this way so that it can go through this, because this one is actually larger than this one, and this whole rod presses out together. But I'll show you that in a minute. So first we're going to get grinding on the pop rivets. And so all I got is I got my grinder, and I'm just going to zip those guys flat real quick. No reason for me to show you, it's pretty straightforward. Alright, so I have all 4 ground down. Next, I'm just going to take a centering punch and put a punch hole in the center of each one. Alright, so now you can see I have my center punch on each one. And now we're going to go drill these. Alright, so I have the setup ready to go. I'm not going to do anything too crazy. It's not like I need a deep hole. I just need something to hold something while I press the pins out the rest of the way. So I'll show you what the hole looks like after I'm done. And I'm not using a crazy large drill bit either. You know, something that's substantially smaller than the pin itself. As you can see, the edge of the hole there. So you want to use a bit that's smaller. You don't want to make the hole any bigger than it has to be. It's nothing too deep. Yeah, 1/8 inch or so. It's just to hold something to be able to press it out. So as far as pushing them out, I just have a socket that's a little bit larger than the pop rivets on the bottom, and I'm just going to use something to get them started, and then a hammer and a centering punch that's smaller than the hole should take them out the rest of the way. So you can see it's nothing crazy, just getting it started. I'm going to do that on the other 3, and then should be able to just pop the ball joint out. Alright, so you can see I have them all pushed in, and now the ball joint just kind of lifts out like so. That's garbage. And now all we got to do is just take our punch and tap those the rest of the way through. So let me just go get a hammer. So I ended up going and pressing them out ever so slightly further in the press because the hammer wasn't working, and now they're at a point, even though I couldn't get them all the way out in the press, that just a quick rack with the hammer will knock them right out. So that's that. I'm going to knock the last one out, and we'll get started on this side. Alright, so next we're going to get started on the bushings. The socket I have that fits it is a 1 3/16. Now, these aren't actually tight. It's just they're run on with a really good thread locker, and it makes it almost impossible for them to be removed. So I'm going to get the impact because I had tried it on the other one with a ratchet and a breaker bar and everything and couldn't get it. And I finally got it with the impact. So, alright, here we go. Number 1. And we're going to do the other side too, because we need them both off. And number 2. So that takes care of that. Now we can get started on pressing, because it's a pressing issue. So to do this correctly and safely, I have the nut installed on the top here, and you have to press it out with the small washer, like so. And basically, I also built, not really built, I cut a piece of angle iron, like so, that I can just slide in the middle there, and that supports it on either end and keeps this from actually bending. And that also allows us to begin pressing. So basically it's just keep going. I have it on the V block down here so that it can pass all the way straight through, and I'm just going to get pumping. So basically when I lifted the pressure off the press, the bottom bushing fell out. So I pushed it back through, took the nut off the top, and now you can just flip it over and pull the rod straight through. So now we have our dog bone out with our little washer on the other end. I'm going to put the big washer back on too, just to protect it, not getting lost, and put it off to the side. And then I'm just going to press this guy the rest of the way. Alright, so for the uppers, there's 2 different bushings that have to be put in, and it has to be done a specific way. So basically, the way this works is you press in the
you press in the 049 first, which the 0459 goes, and I have it somewhere written down. So the 0459, yeah, but that's the wrong list. Here we go. So the 0459 goes into the rear of the upper control arm, and then the 0460 goes into the front of the upper control arm. So basically, you press it in, you put the bushing in, you do the you put the shaft in with the cross pin and everything ready to go, and you use the shaft to line up the second bushing, and you just press that in. So with that, I'm going to start greasing everything up and get started. So this is how I just blew in the bushing, not anything too terrible. And I'm just going to pop the sleeve in, and then we're going to start putting it back together with the other side. So this is the rear bushing. We're going to do the front side now. Alright, so all I did real quick was I just pushed it through the bigger opening, put the washer on, put the other washer on, and just hand tighten the nut so that it's together. And now I'm going to flip it and support it this way and press on the bushing itself, and then I'm going to press the rubber shaft, the steel sleeve in as well. So basically for the lower, because it's flat on the one end, the 0460 bushing can be pressed in by hand. So all I did was I put the washer on, and I pushed the bushing in, and now I just got to push the sleeve in, and then it'll be put the nuts on. So I'm just going to push the crush sleeve in real quick, and then we'll torque the nuts. So nothing too crazy with this. We're just going to put some thread locker on it. It had red on it to begin with, so that's what I'm putting back on it. And then we're just putting our washer on and our nut. And we're going to torque it to 40 foot-pounds. Now, there isn't an actual GM specification for this because this was never considered a service part. So the 40 foot-pounds is what came recommended by most online sources, so that's what I'm going with. Use at your own risk. It is only an aluminum rod. So the ball joint's really straightforward. Just going to drop it on. We're going to thread in the Zerk, and we're just going to run in the bolts real quick. No torque spec on the bolts. They're pretty thin bolts, so, just snug. Alright, so I have the bolts tightened. They're just 10 millimeters, and then it's just the top one that's left for the Zerk, which is an 8 millimeter. And, again, not crazy tight, but snug. And that's that. The upper control arm is assembled and ready to go back in the car now, too. So, with that, we're going to get ready for reassembly. Alright, so we're going to get started on installing the lower control arm. So I just have it oriented ball joint up. And all we're going to do is just slide her in like so. Back to where it belongs. And I'm just going to grab the bolts. And I'm going to okay, and then just do the same thing for the front. Let's go in, and the nuts and the washer goes on the inside. Alright, so I just got the 15 millimeter wrench on the outside, 18 millimeter socket on the inside with my torque wrench, and all I'm going to do is torque it. The torque spec on the nut is 96 foot-pounds, so that's that. Okay, 96 foot-pounds, which is fairly tight.
but you get the gist of it, and you're just going to do that front and back. On the lower, it doesn't really matter because it moves on the shell, and you have to compress the spring up anyway. I'm just torquing it with no load on it because it spins freely in the shell. Alright, so next up is the upper control arm. So I have it oriented properly. Just note, I originally installed that cup washer backwards. The tapered end goes in, not out. And then I also, in the video, installed the ball joint upside down and realized that when I picked it up and looked at it. So, yeah, keep that in mind. So basically all we got to do is just sort of drop this in like this and then just work the wires around it. But I need 2 hands for that, so take my word on it. I'm also going to push the bolts as far out as I can so that I can work it onto the bolt. And before we go completely on, I'm just going to install the seating bushings on the bolts that go on the back side. So the big one goes in the back and the small one goes in the front. And that'll take care of it. And now we'll just do the same thing on the front side. Now I'm going to get the nuts started and partially tightened before I put the shims in on the back end, only because you know, you don't want it to be so loose that when you're tightening it they can like rattle out, fall out, what have you. So I'm just gonna do that, and I'll show you what I mean. Alright, so all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna drop these guys in there and hold them and snug down the bracket the rest of the way. So with that, I'm just gonna snug it down and we'll be back. Alright, so the shims are in, like so, and now we're just gonna final torque these nuts real quick, and that is 63 foot-pounds. So I'll put the torque wrench on them, torque them, and like I said, this moves independently of everything now, so no need to worry about putting it. Next up, we're going to do the lower spring mount. So all I'm going to do is just raise the lower control arm up into position like that, and we're going to get everything ready to go. So you have your long bolt that goes here, and you have your 2 other ones that go there. The long bolt, depending, has to go in from the back, and depending on your clearance, it might not clear the spring, so you just lower it down and raise it back up and in. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the bracket on, like so, and just work our screwing, and then we're going to run our other 2 bolts and drop them through. Like that, and we're gonna get all those torqued. They're all 13 millimeters, so nothing too crazy about that. I just have them snugged up for now, but the torque specs are 30, and 22 foot-pounds for those 3 bolts. So I'm just gonna hit them real quick. And so once again, just got the jack supporting and jacking up the lower control arm so that we can get the bolts for the shock mount started. And we're just going to get those going. So same thing with these bolts. They're 13 millimeter and they get torqued to 22 foot-pounds. Alright, next up's the knuckle. So just going to drop it onto the lower. Get our washer and nut ready. And then we'll just torque it down. So I got a 13/16 on the lower, and we're just going to torque it to 48 foot-pounds. So again, not anything super tight, but tight enough so that we don't run into any issues. So let's just get a torque wrench, set it up to torque at 48 foot-pounds, and we're going to torque. And then if you don't line up the hole, it says to rotate it till it lines up on the next slot on the castle. However, this actually lined up perfectly, so I could just throw the pin in, bend the tabs over if I could find my needle nose, which I can't. Alright, so we've got the cotter pin bent over, and now we're just going to do the same thing on the upper. So I'm pulling the castle nut off on top, like that. And we're just dropping it in. And because of the way the dust boot is on the upper, you kind of gotta work it a little bit to get it to compress some before you can get your nut started. And all I'm doing is just pushing down on the upper with my hand. And that's that. So I'm going to go grab, I believe it's 18mm, and we're going to get started on torquing that. So we've got it going. I have a 3/4 socket because the 18mm for whatever reason didn't fit. And we're torquing it to 32 foot-pounds. And now you can see we are not quite lined up to the hole, so we're just going to tighten it until we can throw the cotter pin in. And we're good to go. Just like that. Alright, next up we're just tightening the sway bar end link bolts, so that's 35 foot-pounds. Alright, so same thing now, we're going to put the new hub in. You just line up the big hole with one of the holes, line up the hub assembly to the car, pop it into place, and then you can just pop your 15mm straight through. To the back like that, and I'm just going to repeat that for the other. So now we're just going to start all the nuts. Carefully, of course. And that's that. So they're 15mm. We're just going to torque them down to 46 foot-pounds. Right, so we're torqued to spec. So now the next part is to get the brake caliper back on, and then we'll reinstall the plastic shield. We also have to get the steering knuckle for the tie rod end installed as well, and we'll do that as well. So the two back bolts are 18mm, and they get torqued to 66 foot-pounds. I'm just going to do that off camera real quick. Alright, for the tie rod end, it is 32 foot-pounds torque. For whatever reason, my tie rod ends just have a locking nut for the jam, so I just put Loctite on it. There's no cotter pin, so I'm just going to torque it, and that'll take care of that. So next we're going to get our plastic bracket back in, since everything's torqued down there. So it's just to sort of work it in. Move around our wire loom, and I mean I need two hands for this, but just take my word for it. Alright, so now that we have the trim installed, the last step is to just grease everything up. So basically you don't want to put a ton in, you know, just a few pumps. You'll see the boot start to expand, and that's it. You know, once you start having the grease come out, that also means that water and dirt can get in, so you'd rather not do that. It only takes a couple pumps, you'll see the boot expand, and that's it, you're done. It's good. So I'm just going to hit these with grease, put the tires back on, but that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Hope it helped out.